this went smoother than most when you don't have estate planning.
Yeah, not too terribly bad, but not too great either.
No. So Sonny wasn't good at estate planning nor wearing helmets.
No.
And, he was kind of a risk taker, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I definitely think he was. That would explain why he died without a will, because he just thought he would live forever.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen. Here's Attorney-CPA, Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week, we should note a milestone, Marley. This is our 100th episode.
That's so exciting.
I know. And then you told me before we went on the air that we were at around 11,000 subscribers.
Yeah, we passed our 10K mark, so yay for that, too.
I mean, to people who do this professionally, that's a small number. But to those of us who started out, as a public service, and we intended this to be mainly people who are interested in estate planning, who wanted to learn something about it. And, to be honest with you, we never expected we'd have 11,000.
No.
So we're very pleased with that. Thank you. And remember to hit the subscription button, those of you who haven't. That means a lot. Interact with us. Mm-hmm. Give us comments on what you think about the show. Hit the like button, the routine. But we're very pleased. We didn't go into this expecting to have 11,000 subscribers. Mm-mm. We thought it'd be mainly people in the St. Louis area where we live, and TuckerAllen's focused primarily there, though they practice some outside this area. But we did like the idea of being able to have content that was beneficial to everybody. So anything we do on the show is really stuff that is of relevance to anybody, certainly in the United States, but where the laws are very similar. So thank you. Maybe we'll see 20,000. I don't know.
I know.
So let's go to our topic today. We think that you're going to be excited about this. Sonny Bono. Sonny Bono is a name that I'm sure all of you know. He is someone, though, that maybe not surprisingly, we think of him, as a kind of a carefree, bohemian sort. So it shouldn't be shocking that there wasn't the proper estate planning in place. But the story's a very interesting one for a lot of reasons. So, Marley, good selection. I'll let you lead us off in the discussion.
Yeah, so Sonny Bono was born February 16th, 1935. His parents were both Italian immigrants, and he was born in Detroit. And his mom called him Sono as a term of endearment, and eventually just, evolved into Sonny. So that's, who we know him as and how he got that name. But he had, a pretty good childhood. His parents moved to Inglewood, California, and then they did split after that. But
so he was about 7 or so.
Yeah, he was
young.
He was about 7. But then from there, he went through high school. He actually didn't even graduate high school because he was so focused on his music career. But he just
that stood out to me, didn't it? To you?
It did. I really thought, especially, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but with his career in politics, I really thought that he would have had to, graduate high school, or he would have and went to college somewhere, but I thought that was very odd.
Yeah, and well, he did go to California, where you're more likely to contract that bug, of becoming a musician or an actor. So I think that he really did. Apparently, all indications are he was all in on a career in some form of entertainment. And primarily music. I mean, he was writing music and performing when he was before he was 15 or so.
Yeah.
And he was serious about it. And I guess he concluded, a college degree is not going to make any difference in this career path. So off he goes.
Strong roots are essential for a healthy tree, especially your family tree. That's why you work hard to take care of your family every day. At TuckerAllen, we know that taking care of your family means planning for the future. Our team provides personalized estate planning to help you protect your family, your legacy, and your future. From wills and trusts to long-term care and estate planning, count on TuckerAllen, personalized estate planning made simple.
It's kind of strange, though, because his parents were immigrants. So you think that it would just be the complete opposite of, no, you need to graduate high school, you need to go to college.
I wonder, though, you're right. And they may have. That may have been, I wonder what tensions there were in that house. Because, I mean, it's one thing to decide not to go to college. But to not graduate high school, that would seem to, might affect even a music career. But apparently it didn't.
Yeah. But he wrote Coco Joe when he was 16, and then that later went on to be recorded outside of him. But it kind of picked up. It got a little bit famous, but his big break didn't really come until he met Cher. But before that, he had a marriage to Donna Rankin, and that was a little bit short-lived. But he did have a child from that, and then he met Cher, and
so his first marriage lasts for about 8 years.
Yeah, it was about 8 years. It wasn't
54 to
I believe 62.
Yeah, and one child from that,
and that was Christine.
So now but people should know that he was writing songs in high school.
Yeah,
and he had, as you said, this Coco Joe. I'd heard of the song, but apparently Righteous Brothers recorded it. Another band recorded it. I think it made its way in the top 100, but by no means, was it a top 10. But the point is, he was serious about music, and he had the ability to write, and his focus primarily in his early career was just writing. Other people were doing most of his stuff.
Yeah, and you'll kind of see after he splits with Cher and all of that goes down, he really goes back to writing. He has like a couple of other hits produced, but it was really, I think he just loved doing the writing.
Yeah, one thing that helped him during this period before he meets Cher, so we're talking about the period before 64. Maybe he met her in 63. Did they marry? When did they marry?
They married in 64.
Okay, so maybe he met her 63 or so. Anyway, before Cher, he had come into contact with Phil Spector, which I imagine is not hard to do if you're in the L.A. area and you decide that you want to have a career in music and you think you can write. Phil Spector had a stable of writers at the time that were churning out hits, and he he was capitalizing on this music that I think he was copywriting it himself. I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but there were several of those stables of writers which for a period of time were churning out hits that were not copywritten in their names. That was the deal. But I think that Sonny retained his copyrights, but he was working for a while writing songs through Phil Spector, who would manage to suggest topics and would market his songs and find people to record them, etc.
Yeah, and he was a percussionist for him for a while and a promotion man and all kinds of stuff, but he did do a couple of songs through that. But yeah, he did all of that, and while he was working his way, through the top, he just did regular jobs. He didn't really have any other career outside of music until he got a little bit later into life. But he met Cher, and they just kind of were a whirlwind. They met and they produced I Got You, Babe, and all kinds of things. And then along with their show, they were just a huge hit.
Yeah, and many of you watched the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, which that was fun for like 3 years?
Yeah, it was about 3 years.
So I think it's 71 to 74 or so. I thought it lasted longer than that, but that's not a bad run. And I do remember they were very funny on stage. And it really continued, I think. I know that they reunited for a show after their divorce. But coming into their divorce, they were still doing the show. The divorce was actually 75. So let's say the show, its last season was 73 or 74.
Yeah, 74, I believe.
Okay, so, I think that the writing was on the wall and the tabloids had kind of written about it. So people knew there were some issues off stage, and it kind of added to the chemistry on stage because there would be this back and forth between them, and it was endearing. And, of course, Cher had people sold Sonny short. Many people thought that Cher had all the talent, and that was kind of reinforced by the fact that after they broke up, she went on to huge things. So we're now through the point where he's married, he's divorced, early 60s, meets Cher. They immediately become a team. He's the primary writer for their songs, although some of their hits were written by others, but he was also a writer of their hits. And they had several. I know they had 2 top 10.
They had I Got You, Babe, and then The Beat Goes On.
Yeah. Those are kind of classics. And I don't know if he wrote either of those. I'm betting he did.
I think he helped in I Got You, Babe. I don't know about The Beat Goes On, though.
Well, it's not a spoiler alert, but going to the end is that he has on his tombstone, if you visit his grave, it's the epitaph is, as the beat goes on. So I suspect he had a hand in writing that. But in any case, he had a lot of, if we talked a lot on this show about this, maybe it's because we talked about a lot of celebrities who are in the entertainment industry, but royalties are a big deal. And he definitely had a number of royalty checks coming on from all the stuff he had written before the marriage, as well as during the marriage. And then they acquired some rights to songs. That's not unusual. You can buy copyrights where you'll get to receive the money for anybody using, playing the music or writing or representing the music in any way, which is the difference between recording and composition. We'll talk about that here in just one second. So take us through the divorce, then what?
Yeah, so they get divorced. He kind of goes and does his own thing. He has his own comedy special for through 1974. It didn't last very long.
Did we mention Chastity?
They did have Chastity. We didn't. They did have Chastity, who is now Chaz. And that is their only child.
She's a transgender,
yes.
Transgender. So, and I remember her. Many of you remember her on the show. She's real cute. And they would have her on a lot toward the end, the last year of the show or so, because she was born in like 69. So she was young. But I remember her being on the show as a toddler. And she was funny.
That's funny.
So anyway, but now she's Chaz.
Yes.
Okay. So continue on. So this is after the divorce.
Yeah. So they have Chaz, one child together. They get divorced. They come to an agreement in terms of settlement, and it's that Sonny has to pay Cher alimony and cover her lawyer's fees and pay her child support as well. And we'll kind of get into those numbers in just a minute. But then they also split their copyright right down the middle, and we'll see in the future that kind of leads to some trouble. But they do that, and he goes on to kind of do his own thing for a little while, and then he meets Mary Whitaker, who he marries, he meets Susie Colo.
That was a brief marriage,
Yes,
right?
that was a very brief marriage. That's kind of why I forgot it.
No kids from that.
Nope, it was just from 81 to 84, so very short-lived.
So after the brief marriage to Susie, they divorce. So what is Sonny doing during this period after that?
Yeah, so he kind of goes on. He starts a new family with Mary Whitaker, marries her, and has 2 children with her. He moves away from music and really starts to get into politics. He was just kind of frustrated with the local government, and he does become mayor of Palm Springs. And then, he moves on from there. He runs for the Republican nomination, but he does lose again. And
that was for governor, wasn't it?
Yes, that was for the U.S. Senate. He lost to Bruce Herschelin. But
who was this ultra-conservative.
Yes.
And what's funny about that is this guy who beat him out for the primary for Senate ends up losing I guess this is California, so maybe it's not surprising. But it's interesting that this guy was more conservative than Sonny. So had Sonny gotten past the nomination for the Republican Party, there's a good chance he would have won that race. At least many experts thought at the time. But the guy that beat him in the nomination process was to the right. This is a problem that both parties have, is the nomination process sometimes produces somebody that can't win in the general. But so he was. We should talk about the fact that he was kind of a celebrity in this Palm Springs. I mean, people there thought hugely of him. I mean, he became really zealous about public service in that community. He stood up for a number of causes. He was involved in environmental stuff. He was somebody who really felt very strongly about public issues. And it's a little surprising. I didn't see this in his early life.
Yeah, and he definitely took a stand that not a lot of people thought he would. So I think that's really what made him stand out from a bunch of the other candidates. And he actually acted on a lot of things that he said he was going to do.
Yeah. Palm Springs, if I haven't seen this, but I've read, there's this large statue to him there, and several things that are named after him. So he really, interestingly enough, during that period of life when many people thought that compared to Cher, he wasn't succeeding, he really was succeeding, arguably by a different measurement. He was the most successful. He ends up going into Congress, right?
The House of Representatives,
yeah,
yes.
so he's there for...
in 94, he gets voted in, and then he's reelected in 96 again. So kind of right up to his death, he's in there. And then he does have a bill that extends copyright, but it didn't come to fruition until after his death. But
yeah, and one thing that is really noteworthy about him, and I'm glad you brought that up, is he had a lot of respect on both sides of the aisle, in part because his issues were not notoriously Republican, for example, that would be divisive. He took stands that, yeah, he was a Republican in the sense that he was conscientious about budget and, he was supportive of the military. But on many social issues, he could have succeeded in California politics, and had he stayed around, who knows, would he have done more? But becoming a congressman for 2 terms is pretty impressive. Right up to his death was right at the end of his second term. But an example of the goodwill that he sowed, he tried to pass this copyright legislation, and it failed before he died. And this copyright legislation was one intended to extend the term for copyrights. And what had happened was people would very early on write something, create something. It could be a movie script. It could be a song. And often these are people who have no political power. Often they're naive. Often they're vulnerable. They're hungry. They need a job. So that's the classic scenario, quite frankly, where often people who are starting out in an industry but have a lot of talent will sometimes lose some of their early stuff because of these things. So they sign contracts in which they transfer composition rights and recording rights. Well, the recording is not so much a problem. It just says that if you sign it away, whenever that recording is played, just for that recording, there's payment made. But also, whenever that recording is played, there's also payment made for the composition, which is it's only incidental to the recording. It could be recorded by somebody else, even in a different way entirely, and the composition rights would still come, but the recording right would not in that example because it's another recording. So recording rights are there. It's a shame when it happens if somebody is exploited, for example, or otherwise loses it prematurely. But really, the composition rights were the focus of Sonny Bono. He had seen this in the industry. Some people had cynically called it the Mickey Mouse legislation. And the reason they called it that was because it would have extended. Mickey Mouse was about to expire from like the 1920s based on the timelines are different, whether it's a corporate or an individual. But anyway, it was about to expire, and this legislation would have, and I think did, extend that. But my point is that Sonny died and failed to get this legislation passed. And after his death, Congress, both sides of the aisle, voted to create what is now called the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act. So this was something that was an act on the part of Congress. It was something that was not political. It reflected the fact that Sonny commanded. He was a likable guy, and I think we all saw that through the camera. He came across as just a likable person, and by all accounts, he was. And a lot of people came to California to visit him who didn't need to, but they did for reasons related to their relationship. I'm talking about prominent political figures who are not in the Republican Party.
I think music-related acts are some of the few bills that bring all people across the aisle together.
Yeah.
There's another bill called the AMP Act fairly recently that was unanimously voted on in Congress.
Really?
Yeah, it's one of the few types of issues that can just bring everybody together is music.
Well, maybe that's what's happening is people are thinking about their own favorite musicians, and that's something everyone can agree that they want them to benefit. That, incidentally, was Justin, our producer. Very good observation, Justin. We get fact-checked in this room, we find regularly, so I'm always watchful of my P's and Q's. Anyway, so let's take this, I guess, to the last marriage and his death.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the estate planning.
Yeah, so of course, like I mentioned, he was remarried again to Mary Whitaker, and they had 2 children, and those children are Cesare and Chiana. And so, they were happy, they were great. She was actually married to him all the way up until his death, and he actually died in January 5th of 1998. So they had gone on a skiing trip, and they kind of got separated. It was like a really blizzardy winter snowstorm, but they still all went out to go skiing. They got separated, and then he crashed into a tree actually and passed away. And what's weird about that was they couldn't find his body for 3 days due to the snowstorm. It was a whole big manhunt. They had to dig his body out. They didn't even know what happened to him at first. They just thought he got lost and they couldn't find him, but that was a whole big tragedy in and of itself.
Yeah, and that happened near Reno, Nevada,
yes.
didn't it?
Yeah.
So he was at a resort there. He knew the owner of the resort, and he had performed there apparently at one time. Mm-hmm. So it's a real nice ski resort. And he and his family were there skiing. They loved to ski. The kids were adolescents.
Yeah, they were barely teens.
Yeah. So they had all 4 launched at the top of this hill, mm-hmm. and I think it was what you'd consider a mid-tier in terms of difficulty. So I'm not a skier, so I don't know the technical terms for these things, but
it'd be like a blue slope. I used to ski. So.
Okay, blue slope. So he goes first, and he tells them to follow. So the kids get one of them gets kind of tangled up and falls, and so the mom and the sister are helping the brother, and so they're delayed for 5 minutes or so, and then they continue on down what they think is the path that Sonny took, and they don't see Sonny, and they get to the bottom and they can't find him. Well, first of all, they look for him around there, then they get to the bottom, they can't find him, and soon they ask people. They thought maybe he went home, so really. They didn't immediately call in the rescue because it wasn't apparent. There's no indication that what had happened had happened. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, we all think that's kind of unlikely. So anyway, it was they didn't start immediately the search because, understandably, Mary thought the last thing she would have thought of was this.
Yeah.
And another irony is that Mary later in an interview said that they had talked about getting this quick release strap, which is something that goes on skis for people who it's safer, and if you're older, it's even more important to have. And it was something that Sonny said he was going to order those, and he had agreed that he needed them, but he decided to wait. So in this case, you have the release is not as...
Yeah, it's not as difficult to get off. So if you're headed towards something and you need to slow down and you can't slow down, then the quick release will... if you've ever skied before, your boots can get really caught they snap into the skis and they can get really caught in there. But this would have allowed them to come out quicker, so he could have thrown himself off the skis and the skis would have just kept going instead of him and the skis. Yeah.
And good. I'm glad we have a skier to explain this. And then also, there was a thing about a helmet. What, he was wearing a helmet? Is that right?
I don't believe he was. So what I read was that he was supposed to be wearing a helmet, which if anybody skis, please wear helmets.
Yeah.
But he was supposed to be wearing a helmet, and then I think he either left it at the bottom, forgot it, or something, but he was like, no, I'll be fine without it. Because when you have so much gear on and everything, that's really the last thing you're thinking about is your helmet, because it's just another big bulky thing. And
he might have been somebody, quite frankly, who
didn't
wear a helmet. I mean, I know people who ride motorcycles that don't wear helmets.
Yeah. That scares me.
Yeah, there's no room for error on that. So, but I will say this: some people, according to what the autopsy had been, and according to the way Mary described what she knew about this incident, she said that even if he had had a helmet on, that some of the experts said that he hit that so hard.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's something that he didn't know was there until just the last second.
Yeah, and I mean, they were pretty avid skiers, and that's why I was like, that's really strange. But I guess it was just like a mixture of the winter weather, because when you're up on the slopes and like it's really snowing a bit like harder than it normally would, it's hard and it gets a lot icier because it's not, it's getting more packed down. It's fresh. It's not like powder snow. And so it's really easy to, A, lose your way, because even if you know the routes, it's when you're in that winter storm, it's hard to see things. And then B, it gets a lot slipperier. So you have less room for error, and you can veer off a certain way, and it makes you go a lot faster, and it's a lot harder to slow down.
Yeah, and coincidentally, like 5 days before, Robert F. Kennedy's son, whose name I don't remember, but he died at a different ski slope. But same thing. He died he had gone into a tree, I think.
Yeah, it's really, really easy to have accidents when you're skiing. That's why it's so scary. And usually a lot of resorts now, they won't have any trees. They'll have like a big berth between trees and, the skiing area.
Yeah, you wonder if there have been litigation.
Yeah.
But the idea of two celebrity names within a week of each other, fatalities on ski slopes. Anyway, so he passes away, and not surprisingly, as I suggested at the outset, there was no will. It is a little surprising. I mean, he accumulated assets.
Yeah, he had a net worth of $2 million when he died, so you would think that he...
Yeah, and you suspect, and remember, we've talked about this before, these valuations generally fail to adequately value copyrights and other intellectual property. So keep that in mind when you think $2 million. That's probably assigning some value, I presume, that when the executor or the personal administrator did an accounting, he would have prepared a list of assets and then liabilities. And I suspect that that's going to show, I've not reviewed those, but it probably would show a value for those. But I'm real confident, since the total number came to $2 million, give or take, I think that they clearly underestimated that value. We know it happened in a horrendous way with some of the big names that we've done on this show in the past. So let's go back for a second to the divorce, and we need to bring that in. Cher apparently had a pretty good relationship with Sonny for the balance of their joint lives, and Chastity she was with both, and there's a good relationship. Apparently, there was not a bad relationship with Mary and Cher. As a matter of fact, Mary, through the funeral and even shortly thereafter, she was saying that Cher was very important to her in providing emotional support, and I'm sure in handling the press and things that I think Cher, who's so adroit at that, I think she came in and helped deal with this world publicity that came down on Sonny. And I don't think people realized until he died that he had so many people who were fans, who remembered him. Nonetheless, Cher, because of that agreement you mentioned a while ago, there was supposed to have been child support of $15,000 a month paid. There was supposed to be maintenance, believe it or not, of $25,000 a month for 6 months, and then I think there were $41,000 in attorney fees. Sonny was ordered to pay that. None of those is that unusual. The maintenance is a little unusual because Cher. I guess at the time of the divorce, it wasn't clear Cher was going to become far and away the most successful between the two financially.
Yeah, and I think a reason that she went after him after he died was also because Chaz at that time was, when he passed away, he was an adult. So I don't think anything would have been passed down to him unless Mary gave it to him. So I think that's why Cher came back and was like, no, I want this money for Chaz, so that she could give it to him.
Yeah, and that's probably true.
Yeah.
So So I do think in this case that bringing that action for money that wasn't paid, that was ordered as part of the divorce, was appropriate, and I don't think Mary viewed it as a really hostile act. I'm sure she wasn't happy about it, but there's no evidence that it was a problem between her and Cher outside the courtroom. And incidentally, let me say this: because Sonny didn't pay it, doesn't mean he's a deadbeat dad.
No.
I'm sure the circumstances was that there was plenty of money. We don't know the details of that, but we know enough about Sonny to where he paid his debts, and he definitely loved Chaz. So, and maybe incidentally, money was passed in other ways that he didn't get credit later on. I see that in domestic relations. It happens where a dad that's accused of not having paid support, it means he didn't pay it properly. So he was naive and he ignored the court order, and instead he was giving money in ways and buying things and doing things where in the client's mind he's thinking, I'm taking care of my child, but legally, no, you're not. It doesn't count. None of that is accounting toward your support. It has to be a check to the spouse. If the order, unless the order says otherwise. So in this case, that was the first lawsuit, was that one. There was briefly a lawsuit, we won't go into it. A guy asserted that he was another child. Yeah,
some random guy said that he came forward and said that he was a child of a brief relationship Sonny had with somebody, but then the courts were like, okay, we'll do a DNA test, and he didn't. There was another word from him ever. So
in this guy's defense, can you find his name?
Yeah, it was Sean Machu.
Yeah, Sean Machu. In this guy's defense, though, apparently there was an affair that that Sonny mentioned in his biography. He wrote an autobiography.
Yeah.
And apparently he mentioned he had an affair with this guy's mom. So this guy jumped to the conclusion that he must be his dad, but apparently testing was done and he dropped it. So anyway, so there was that lawsuit that came along. Otherwise, here's what happens in intestate succession, apparently in California. As we've talked in the show a lot, when you don't have a will or you don't have a trust, then the state, whatever its laws are going to govern the distribution of your property, whether you like it or not. And in California, what happened was there was a three-way division. It was 1/3 of the assets went to Mary, the widow, and one third went to one of the adult children, which is Chaz, and another 1/3 went to the child from the first marriage, which was an adult. She was around age 40.
Yes.
Chaz was around age 30, and then there was Mary. And you may say, well, what about the two children of Mary's, the minor children? Well, it's not surprising that in intestate succession, where the legislature decides how to distribute things, then the idea is, look, if there are minor children and we leave it to their mom, then we've taken care of the kids. That's their share. And it's up to mom, to see to it gets to the kids. As a general rule, that probably works as a general rule, but we know there's not always. And I don't think you want to leave your most important planning in your life to general rules. General rules seem to be those rules that apply to everybody else for a lot of people. Now let's. I want to talk about one other thing about the estate planning here that was kind of came out of left field. It looked like this was all behind them. You should know that part of the settlement in the divorce was that there was this marital settlement agreement. This was not litigated, hence $41,000 attorney fees, which is relatively low. Some of you are thinking it's huge, but it's low for these people at that time. And so in the marital settlement agreement, it was agreed that any copyrights that had been acquired during the marriage, meaning they'd been purchased or otherwise obtained ownership, or that were created during the marriage, and there was that too. So any songs that Sonny wrote or that Cher even contributed to, those things that happened during the marriage, that's marital property. That's the definition of marital property. And similarly, when you acquire things during the marriage, that's marital property. So not surprisingly, the settlement agreement said that these assets will be divided 50-50. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to the distinction between royalty rights and the composition rights that we talked about a few moments ago. But apparently there was a change that took place in the copyright law, and this statute gave the right for somebody who had transferred earlier these termination rights or at least they had transferred the recordings and they had transferred composition, and now these termination rights said that you could choose to notify those that are, as far as the composition, you terminated those obligations, not the recording rights. And I talked about that a few minutes ago. It kind of makes sense. But anyway, the composition rights are something where you can choose to terminate an agreement that you have. And I don't know that it tells that law. This isn't my area of the law. Let me disclaim that. I'm not a copyright or intellectual property lawyer. I guess I should be doing this show. It ends up we talk more about this subject than any other in the law, almost. So when the children, who I think were in charge of a trust at that time, which was created to manage the intellectual property. Mm-hmm. So what happens is children of songwriters and others, they often end up with this. There's this catalog of sorts in which there's a lot of songs that are entitled to various forms of royalty recordings, royalties, as well as composition and other things. So it's not unusual to create a trust or an entity, the purpose of which is to manage this, because somebody, has to send out notices. They have to keep an accounting. I mean, in other words, this is not a passive investment. You might think of it as a passive investment, kind of like clipping coupons, but it's really not. Somebody has to police it, mm-hmm. and somebody has to keep the accounting, and someone has to assure that if the payment doesn't come in, they have to make phone calls, they have to follow up. So to have an entity, the job of which is to control that and to put someone in it and say, look, this is your job, is to manage this, it really is incumbent. And even in this case where there's not a ton of written songs, Sonny compared to, I don't know, Bob Dylan or somebody, it's far less work. But the point is, the example is, even with somebody like this, it requires attention. So this had been formed, I'm sure, by Mary, probably, and the kids as minors, signed on to it as beneficiaries of this entity. And through this entity, the decision was made in 2016 that they're going to make this announcement, which they had the right to do under this copyright regulation we talked about a while ago. They had a right to terminate the composition rights. So they interpreted that to mean that the marital settlement agreement, by which they divided 50-50 the interest, they interpreted that to mean that they had a right now to terminate Cher's right to receive their dad's mm-hmm. composition royalties. And they thought, Cher's kind of like somebody that we had sold it to, like a recording company or some other entertainment industry, and a lot of time's gone by and we're now going to terminate it. There are conditions to when you can terminate it, which aren't relevant here. But anyway, they met those conditions. So this ends up causing a big blow up. As you can imagine, Cher, 50% of the value of this, and I know it's bringing in a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
We don't know how much, but substantial, we'll assume. And so to court they go. And this ends up goes to trial court, goes to appellate court, and it raised an important point. The Cher's attorneys made the argument, a very good argument, incidentally, and I'll also tell you ended up being a winning argument. They said, wait. What this did was terminated this federal copyright obligation. Mm-hmm. And Cher is saying, I don't disagree with that. It may be that I don't have a claim under federal copyright law because they may have the right to terminate that. However, they have a duty under California marital property law, and they signed a contract, and this is marital property, so they're bound under that contract to keep paying me this 50% value. And furthermore, if you conclude, Court of Appeals, that this is not true, that California property law is that vulnerable, that my deal was, then this is a basis under California domestic relations law for me to go back and reopen the divorce and have a redivision of assets. So in other words, if there's something that goes catastrophically wrong with a property settlement, and it turns out that there's fraud or that the half that, in this case, the wife got is somehow a vapor, that it's not real or it's not what they thought or something, there has to be some culpability on the other side. It can't be that something bad happened and it's the other side's problem. I mean, where there's some culpability on the other side, some misrepresentation, some act, then that person can go back to court and reopen the divorce. So in this case, the Court of Appeals came to the right conclusion. They said it's true. You can terminate the rights under the federal law. However, they told the Sonny Bono Trust that there's this obligation to keep making these payments under the California law. So,
and it's still ongoing. They haven't finalized everything
yeah,
either.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's still going, but I think that this last decision is likely to is going to settle that up very quickly. I haven't looked at what's happened in the last year, but this case was followed closely by divorce lawyers, by estate planners, by intellectual property. This was followed closely across the United States, and there was a lot of money spent, I can tell you, on both sides. I don't think either side paid the other's attorney fees that I could see from the order. But very interesting case.
Yes.
So this all could have been headed off by a proper trust in which this was planned correctly. Even the later litigation, this could have all been headed off and handled in a much better way. Lawyers would have made less money, but I don't think you guys are going to lose any sleep over that. And there would have been less stress in the relationships. But all things considered, this went smoother than most when you don't have estate planning.
Yeah, not too terribly bad, but not too great either.
No. So Sonny wasn't good at estate planning nor wearing helmets.
No.
And, he was kind of a risk taker, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I definitely think he was. That would explain why he died without a will, because he just thought he would live forever. So.
Yeah. So as you can see, there are several lessons here for us as we've looked at Sonny's life and the estate afterwards. So I hope this has been helpful to you. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.